Mr. Falvey, you just recently wrote this particular book, Dharma as Man. Will you introduce this book for our audience?
Sure. Thank you very much. The book is called Dharma as Man, a myth of Jesus in Buddhist lands, and it's set out as a novel. And the novelistic aspect of it is an Indian father, an old man, reading it to his young son. It's put in that context to try and overcome some hurdles that people might have when they see their own scriptures being treated in this way, whether they're Buddhist or Christian. The novel, in fact, follows the gospel story of Jesus, the four gospels, but then also the Gospel of Thomas. In taking those in a unified story, because of course the stories are not consistent with each other separately, that has been done by other people. So I took somebody else's unified gospel, if you like, and then sat down with it and used it as a reflective device to try and interpret each of those Christian teachings, Jesus' teachings, into the way that Buddhism is understood from my background in Buddhism. My background in Buddhism is Theravada, particularly from Thailand. In addition to that, the Western Buddhist order, which is a small order that grew out of England and has interpreted all of the different Buddhist traditions into one embracing approach for Westerners, has also informed me through some of their literature and some of their practices. So it's using those concepts of Buddhism to explain what's in the Jesus story.
Right. This is the story of Jesus, but you also sometimes mention it as a story of Buddha. Do you not?
It's not meant to be the story of Buddha, and Buddha isn't mentioned there as part of the story. The name given to the central character is Dharma. Using the word Dharma, which has so many meanings, to say, okay, for some Christians they say Jesus is the truth. So Dharma is sometimes said to be the truth as a simplistic way of explaining aspects of Buddhism. So that became the word to say what the life story is trying to impart to the reader or to the person reflecting on it is an understanding of Dharma. Whether it's a Christian reflecting on their own scriptures or it's someone reflecting on this story, it's trying to impart the essence of the Dharma.
Right. Dharma meaning word, logo, and now embodied in an individual, Jesus.
It's taking that perspective in order to present the idea. It's not in any way trying to say there is a real person like Dharma, and it's certainly not saying there is a real person like Jesus. The relationship between the life story of the Buddha and the life story of Jesus in their respective traditions is, to me, not just a story for believing in. Of course we have some Buddhists who want to believe it literally, and we have many Christians want to believe it literally, but that's not the essence of the stories. They are stories with multiple layers that have been prepared with great genius in those different traditions as a means of imparting the essence of how we transform ourselves. So in this case, and contrary to many Christians' reading of the scriptures, Dharma, the name given to the character in the story, is a man searching for his own enlightenment and practicing, and at times achieving it and then at times not. And so sometimes he's depicted as being angry, just as Jesus is in the scriptures. But it doesn't mean that this is somehow a flawed character. It just means this is a human that is enlightened part of the time. And as he says in the book, practice as I practice, so that you may be enlightened more frequently. As if enlightenment is not something that's once forever.
Right.
This is continuous practice, and there are all sorts of conditions on us at all times that we cannot control everything. That's the opposite to what he is really saying. So occasionally things overcome us, It can be sickness, it can be some difference occurs in our own metabolism and changes our behaviour, all part of conditionality. This is just part of the way life is. So keep working to continue to be in that state, which some people call enlightenment.
Right. You mentioned that this is a multi-layered story, just as usually that's the case with the Gospels and the parables. Talk about how you put yourself in the position of a writer as you developed this multi-layered story. You really had to become a great man to write this story.
I'm certainly not sure of that part, but the process was a developmental process for me. Prior to doing this, a few years ago, I had done something that was much shorter by taking what might have been the essential words of Jesus that theologians have drawn out by an analytical process to say which parts of that story have been added later. The words are different, the language and so forth. And those essential words, put into Buddhist terminology, was a very easy task because it was very similar to the Dharma part. That is interesting in itself, and that process I found on reflecting on it afterwards had been a transformative process for me. This then came along a few years later, mainly because people kept suggesting that nobody knows that theological document of the essential sayings of Jesus, that only theologians know it. People know the story in the Bible, so why not do that? And I delayed doing it because I had other things I do, but it was always in my mind, and then somehow crossed my desk a copy of a book called The Unified Gospel. So it was put into one story, and I thought, well, that's the basis I can use. I then sat down each day and spent about 2 hours reflecting on a couple of verses and thinking, what could that mean in different ways? And putting that down and then coming back several times. So that it's the initial process is reflective, there's a meditative process, and then in addition there's revisiting it several times. This book is, in normal publication parlance you would say editing. If you use that, you'd say this book has been edited hundreds of times, but it's not really editing, it's going back and thinking, is this the meaning behind the things? Have I captured every meaning that's there? And I'm sure I haven't, because it's every time I read it, I find another layer that I could have put in. But at that time I could have, because as a developmental process I wasn't at that point.
Right. So in fact it became your daily Bible reading.
Yes.
To some extent.
Yeah, my daily Dharma reading.
Your daily Dharma reading.